RSPCA presents Animal Futures, hosted by Kate Quilton.
Welcome to a special edition of the Animal Futures podcast, recorded live at the RSPCA Wilberforce Lecture 2025. Our series has explored the future of animal welfare and how the decisions we take today will affect the world we build for animals and us tomorrow. In this podcast, you will hear our expert panellists take a deep dive into one of the key themes of our series, with a discussion titled Technology Unleashed: How Can Tech Help Us Build a Better World for Animals? Joining the discussion are Melanie Challenger, RSPCA Vice President, author, broadcaster and bioethicist, focusing on the relationships between humans and animals. Jane Lawton, Managing Director at Earth Species Project, dedicated to decoding animal communication using AI. Thomas Schultz, Yago, RSPCA Director of Advocacy and Prevention. From robot pets and AI communication with animals to gene editing and cultivated meat, technology holds immense potential to transform animal lives for better or worse. In this episode, our expert panel explore what a tech-driven future could mean for our relationship with animals and how we can harness these advancements to create a kinder world for all.
Let's get into it. Okay, so we're all here broadly to talk about how tech ultimately is going to influence animal welfare. I want to start with you, Melanie. How do you think tech can help when it comes to animal welfare, and are you hopeful?
Yes, two separate things that I'll pull apart there. So some examples of where tech, or that have made me feel hopeful recently from tech, have been we have growing problems with human-wildlife conflict. And so there was a project that I was introduced to a year ago where they had taken a kind of traditional camera trap, attached in a kind of AI system to it, a recognition system, and deployed this in West Bengal, I think in India, where there was a lot of human-elephant conflict, and that was often leading to injuries, certainly, and sometimes fatalities. When they deployed that technology in 2023, over a year, they were able to reduce fatalities and injuries to zero. So it was a huge success. And basically how it works is that it was able, the AI is deployed through the camera trap. It was able to identify elephants in the area in a kind of, is something like 90% effectiveness at identifying elephants. And then that sets an alert system so that people would know that they were in the area. So quite simple as a premise, but very, very effective. So that sort of thing makes me deeply hopeful. There are then other technologies like, for example, precision farming, so which is a sort of suite of different technologies that are being sort of rolled out in farming. Now, some of those have shown some sort of welfare benefits for, in particularly identifying disease, for example. So there was a case with studying the extent to which sort of we were able to identify mastitis in dairy cows, and that was identified at about sort of 40% effectiveness. So being able to address the needs of animals faster, great. But this is where I don't get so hopeful, because the main take home, or the main thing I want us to think about, is that at the moment animals are deeply disenfranchised and their lives pass in highly unjust and non-ideal circumstances, and our tech is being developed, conceptualized and rolled out into non-ideal situations. So there's just as much likelihood, if not more, that if we do that, tech can end up amplifying the kind of injustice that they're facing and in entrenching some of the welfare challenges that they're facing, rather than resolving them.
Interesting. Jane, how about you? How do you feel about it? Are you hopeful?
Well, not surprisingly, since I work with an organisation that is using technology to better understand animals, I am quite hopeful. I think for me, it's primarily about the fact that technology can accelerate our understanding of animals. There's lots and lots of applications like what Man was talking about, where technology has been used for a very, very long time to advance conservation, to mitigate human-wildlife conflict. But for me, it's fundamental fundamentally about the fact that we know nature is very, very complex. It's actually kind of beyond our ability to fathom and understand. And there's vast amounts of data being generated right now about nature, which we can't analyze, we can't make sense of. And so the advances in technology and specifically AI are allowing us to do that. And if you think about citizen science projects as an example, it's simply going to accelerate our ability to make sense of the incredible work that people out there are doing in observing nature. There's also real hope. I mean, clearly there's a lot of hope in terms of tech and climate change. Again, the positive and the negative, but just in terms of understanding what is happening around the world. One of the most effective things that's being used right now is bioacoustic monitoring to understand the health of ecosystems. And that's simple as putting a microphone into a forest and tracking the kinds of sounds that that forest is emitting from the animals, from the trees, and then getting a sense, is that actually degrading over time? So I think there's lots and lots of really hopeful stuff. And there's lots of things to be concerned about as well. And the reality is, every time you invent a new technology, you invent a new form of responsibility. And the challenge we're facing right now is that technology is accelerating beyond anything we have seen before. It's exponential. And there is no way that even our kind of almost ethical stance can keep up with that, let alone the regulatory frameworks. So that is deeply concerning. And I think we need to make sure that we are pointing out where we see the issues and at least trying to get ahead of things.
Thanks, Jane. How about you, Thomas?
Well, I'm with Jane in thinking if technology helps us to understand better how animals think and feel, that must lead to better welfare. I'm an optimistic kind of guy. I wouldn't work at the RSPCA if I thought otherwise. So the challenge really is to manage that and to be very vigilant on where technology might deviate from the good cause that we could put it to. I mean, some of my colleagues are in the room here today, the colleagues that work in the science and policy teams. There are numerous examples, whether it's animals in science or farmed animals, where we look at very concrete examples that we would, broadly speaking, applaud. But we're not naive, and we know that we're going to just have to keep a very close eye on where maybe discretions will happen.
I think what I personally love about the RSPCA is that the RSPCA has been with us for so long that, you've almost encountered lots of advancements at different times, in the last, 200 years. And this is another.
Well, it is. And the people who founded the RSPCA over 200 years ago, they put that P in the title for a reason. It is going to be about prevention. We can do all we want, and we do every day, to help animals in need that are neglected or abused. But if we really want to change the dial, we've got to go back and look at what technology may be able to contribute today in that preventative work that we also need to focus on.
There are some hopeful possibilities with the way that we can deploy people's views and potentially even the views of other species as we move forward. So I am hopeful. I'm just laying that seed now before I go into the dark territory.
Which leads us brilliantly on to imagine a world where we can communicate with animals even better than we do now, which was a big part of the Animal Futures report, and us posing the question, is AI going to allow us to communicate with our pets better? Is it going to happen? Am I going to play chess with a dolphin?
Yeah, so I mean, this is the heartland of what our organization does. Earth Species Project is essentially developing frontier AI to try to understand what animals are saying. And I do really, really want to point that out now, because I think this is in the hopeful territory when we think about using AI to understand other animals better, to learn to listen to them and learn from them. It can very quickly stray into the areas of concern when we talk about communicating with other animals. And quite often you could imagine spaces where that is actually more to the benefit of human beings than other animals. So that's a slight tangent, but I think what we feel really strongly at our organization is that many of the challenges we're facing today the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis in particular, are driven by the fact that we have become so disconnected from the rest of nature. And I use the rest of nature deliberately because we've forgotten that we're part of it. We've forgotten that we are, in fact, animals. And so that kind of disconnection is what allows us to exploit and extract and see everything else as the other and not part of ourselves. So we fundamentally believe that if you can understand animals better, you can use communication as a window into the intelligences and the cultures of other species. And that in so doing, you can create impact at many, many different levels. I mean, we've talked about accelerating science, advancing conservation, but fundamentally, we believe that it can also change the way we think about ourselves and help us move away from this sense of exceptionalism. We recently experienced Jane Goodall's passing. She was the person that really discovered that chimpanzees make and use tools. And there was that famous quote, which is from Louis Leakey, which is, we must now redefine man, redefine tool, or accept chimpanzees as human beings. That was in like the early 60s. And so language is kind of like one of those next barriers that we have erected. Is only human beings have language. If you speak to most scientists, they will say there is no chance that animals have language. And yet there are discoveries every month about a hallmark of what we thought was human language in other animals. So this ability to kind of break down those barriers and almost open our ability to connect, because so much of nature is actually communicating all around us in ways that we simply don't have the hardware to even perceive. I mean, plants make sounds, and actually, if Chloe was a real cat, Chloe might be able to hear at the same frequency that a houseplant communicates its distress when it needs water, right? So there's all this stuff happening and we are actually not even in the loop. But AI can actually help us to connect to that. Will that help us treat animals differently? I mean, I hope so. It's not a given though. And I think we have to be incredibly intentional about this and think about ways in which, if we can understand other animals, how does that upend current systems? How does it shift the economic system from an extractive one to a regenerative one? How can we start to engage, learn from nature, learn from other animals, but also start to engage those voices in our decision-making processes? If we can do that kind of thing, we might move into the space of transformation and different ways of engaging with other ideas. But as I said, it's not a given. And it's really about humility, engendering humility in ourselves.
About 70% of the audience think that it would transform the way we treat them if we could communicate with our animals better. Lots of people nodding. What do you think, Melanie?
I think one of the greatest problems that other organisms face, but most particularly animals who can communicate with us, and actually we're pretty good at guessing what animals need and want anyway. So I've done an experiment in a room with a number of different people, different groups of people in different countries actually, where I've played audio of a cow who's had her calf taken away, and I've played audio of a cow humming. So cows hum when they're contented, because a woman is singing a lullaby. And I take the images out, so you're just listening, and then I ask this sort of often quite sceptical crowd if they feel confident telling me what they think, just whether they think it's good or bad or what they think might be happening, and they get it right 100% of the times, pretty much everybody in the room. And then when I sort of tentatively ask them, and they might offer reasons why, they're actually pretty good at guessing what they think might be happening. Then I put the visuals back in, and when I put the visuals back in, there are audible gasps. It transforms when they then see all of the other information beyond just the auditory information, when they can see the physical effort, when they can see, and in the video with the cow that's humming, her ear lifts up and she moves her whole body closer to the woman who's singing the lullaby. And people fall to pieces at this point in time. And this is often a skeptical crowd. So we can communicate with other animals already, and we understand really that they have interests and preferences. But what is missing, I'm afraid, is the gravitas that comes with legal and moral standing. We do not have robust legal and moral standing for other living beings anywhere on this planet. That's really where we need to go. So if this kind of technology can be part of what it is that gets us in that direction, then I think that would be an incredible bonus. One area of concern I have actually is for us broadly within who are concerned with animal welfare and animal rights, is that at the moment there's a lot of conversation floating around about AI welfare, believe it or not, alongside animal welfare. So in this same conversation, there's a growing discourse around AI welfare. And that concerns me, because that means that we're sort of seeing synthetic forms of calculation in computers as somehow being analogous with what is intelligence or sensitivity or agency in other living beings. And that is not a pathway that I think we should be going down.
We've got a question from the floor on this. Can we get a mic to Emma? Emma Slawinski. She's at League Against Cruel Sports. Oh, she was right front.
Staying with the trouble.
There she is.
Thank you, Kate. Am I on?
You are.
I am on. Wonderful. This is fantastic. And yeah, the idea that an AI vacuum cleaner might get legal recognition before an animal does has exploded my brain. Okay. And my question really relates to that, which is, do we think it's worthwhile trying to pursue some kind of government policy or legal protection around the implementation of AI? So if it is a function that's going to be negative for animals, there's just something in place, perhaps a little bit like there is with some of the genetic stuff, where there's at least a question asked first, is now the time to be doing that? And if so, is there a way we could get animals represented in the formulation of that policy, so we're not repeating that mistake of doing stuff to them rather than involving them in that process?
I think any area where there is a question, we really broadly what we're talking about is justice, that an affected person or entity who is affected and who should have moral considerability, so should matter to us, and is going to be directly affected by an action, should be consulted in a just and fair society. Of course, we don't have anything like that really anywhere. We consult humans, so we're great actors. Everyone who is probably in the room, in a way, the Citizens' Assembly are to a certain extent trying to take us some steps forward. The radical step of whether we would really more substantively consider and include other species. I mean, outside of my role in the RSPCA, that's work that I do in a project called Animals in the Room, where we're looking at how we can really substantively represent other species in a more, as a new kind of political frontier. And let me tell you, it's extremely complicated. It's not easy and it's not trivial. But I think in the meantime, while we work towards that kind of horizon, we should certainly be deploying more citizens' assemblies. So we need to be having more citizen consultation. We need to be having more debate. We need to be slowing down and placing interventions so that you don't get straight from one kind of biased sort of human-driven, human-centric set of assumptions that don't sufficiently do due diligence and really consider other living beings as moral subjects and entities that we should consider. So everything that we can do, so of course we should be doing that with AI development, no question. I think every frontier is an opportunity to start building that more democratic landscape for other species.
Yeah, and if I can add to that as well, I think yes, 100%, we should be pushing for regulatory frameworks, and specifically, we're trying to catalyze a conversation around regulation around how you use AI whether it's to communicate with or just simply to understand other animals. And what is interesting is that a lot of people then say, well, we can't even do that in the human domain, right? We haven't done that effectively for AI and how it affects human beings. But actually, this could be an interesting window in, right? Suggesting that there need to be regulatory frameworks for the way AI is affecting animals, and there's some interesting stuff happening in the EU around that. Could actually be an interesting way in then to opening the door to more effective regulation for human beings as well. We actually did a survey recently of how people around the world were feeling about AI and animal communication. And we were really surprised by the results. I mean, first of all, this is 1,000 people in more than 67 countries. And more than 60% definitely feel that animals have language, emotion, and even culture. 60% also showed great openness to including other animals in decision-making processes in some way, shape, or form. They didn't know how that was going to work, but they were really interested. And that blew us away, actually. We were quite surprised by that. But on the flip side, I think it was 85% of those polled were really, really concerned about the potential unintended consequences of the technology and felt that in particular, we needed to keep close tabs on industry, using this in factory farming situations as an example. So I think there's a lot of openness there. And I actually think there's some real opportunities to start moving this forward. It's not going to be easy, but I think we need to.
I very much agree with that. The only thing I would add is just to build on your point that we're horrible at this when it comes to, humans. Where do we even start? So your point there that it is maybe opens the discussion by introducing animals into this framework from the very beginning might get us some more attention. What I worry about is the speed in which all of this develops, because the classic approach of an organization like the RSPCA is invest in education, run a few campaigns, be smart in the way you work with parliamentarians, etc. We're not going to have the time to do that systematically and from the bottom up. So what is the thought leadership that the RSPCA and others can provide using these findings from your research and make sure that there's far more awareness, and then think about that smart way in. Time is not on our side.
No, and there may be some interesting almost acupuncture points as well, where, as an example, exploring now what it would take for the voice of an animal to be admissible in a court of law, right? If you can start to point the research in that direction, to actually start getting to places where we can consult. And that will mean that I think that the regulation has to follow.
From AI, we move on to here she comes. I think a lot of you picked her up by. Okay, a lot of you are probably. Did you have a little go on, Chloe? Oh yeah, I think she did the rounds. And with about. I told you she is the star of the show. With AI, comes the opportunity to make even more realistic robot pets like this. I'll pass her along. Oh, Chloe. Thomas, you got a lot of thoughts on robot pets. I want you to tell us about robot pets.
Well, yeah,
Your experience of them so far.
I will want to start by saying I'm far more in the space of the real thing rather than a robot pet. However, I want to give you two examples why I think this is really an important building block for future interaction. In my spare time, I'm a trustee for an organization called Hearing Dogs for Deaf People. So we match assistance dogs for people with profound hearing loss, and those are assistance animals. They help them just navigate everyday life, fire alarms, doorbells, that sort of thing. But equally important is to combat the loneliness and isolation that comes with hearing loss. And I think the challenge for that organization is we just don't have enough volunteers to work with the puppies to get enough of these dogs into the match with a person with profound hearing loss. So I can totally see how in a very short time frame you would find a way of having a robot do some of that work instead of a real animal. And the second example, directly related to little Chloe here, My own dog is a therapy dog that goes to a care home close to where I live. Pets as Therapy is a great organization matching a lot of schools, patients, people with dementia, etc. So we go to a Bupa care home, and I see these emerging more and more now. Because you can just buy them. You can just buy a version of it. Maybe this is more sophisticated. You can buy this on Amazon.
She
And
brings in at about 150 quid.
yeah, exactly. I know this because the first time I saw one, I was just asked to change batteries, which they do go through quite a bit of batteries. But it's fascinating to see how people, these are very depressing places. And when you see, the rise of dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., and how the impact that has on society, my point would be,
She knows her very
why not? Why not? This is a very, very cheap way to assist with what otherwise is hugely expensive care and medical needs, etc. So I totally see a future for that in one way or the other, but in those areas in particular.
What about you, Jay?
There are these advantages, but then there's this. I mean, I have always had cats, and it's something about recognizing another being, and learning to kind of adapt, change to something, an animal that's unpredictable and that you will never fully understand. I just think there's so much power in that, and that's the power of when people are exposed to companion animals, that it unlocks something in them in terms of empathy. I don't know. And I also really, really worry just about more, particularly when we mentioned Amazon, more products be sold in the world. And it just kind of reinforces our training as consumers, stuff. So
Absolutely. My point is there will be a lot of people for whom it will not be realistic to actually hold a pet because they can't afford it, or they are in a situation where that's just not possible. And if there is a medical or mental health way to alleviate some of that, I would not hesitate for 1 minute to go down that route.
Have we got a poll on robot pets? I'd love to see the results of the robot pets poll. And maybe while we chase that, we've actually got a question from the floor. Andy from the New Citizen Project. Is he around? Oh, there we go. Great.
Hello. Thank you very much. I'm Andy from the New Citizen Project. I co-ran the Citizen Assembly alongside this brilliant team. My question was about, actually, there's 15 billion recommendations that were voted through by the Assembly and are in the report and RSPCA has responded to. It was actually the one that was about technology that was the one recommendation that didn't get enough support by the Citizens Assembly to become a recommendation around using technology to further welfare. And I think that's something we saw across the whole of the big conversation, the online conversation with the public as well. And in our polling with the representative polling, there's almost this knee-jerk reaction from a lot of people against just the use of technology in general. People spoke about wanting natural solutions, this idea of things being kind of not real. People know best how to look after animals. So I just wondered, is that kind of knee-jerk reaction against technology something you've seen in your work? And also, kind of, what does that tell us about how technological solutions should be rolled out?
I mean, I can say from my perspective, that is not the knee-jerk reaction they get, because really what we're offering is the potential to understand other animals better, and people are very, very engaged with that. I think the other thing that's been really interesting is, of course, with the rise of ChatGPT, which and all the other models now that have burst on the scene in the last couple of years, is that people now see that potential. They're engaging with it, and they see that actually they're seeing that it's probably inevitable that we're going to have something similar for the animal domain soon. So I think people really, really engage with that potential and possibility. Their minds always go to the positive. That's typically where they go. And it often is, can I talk to my dog or my cat? That's where people go. When we raise unintended consequences in terms of, the ability to help poachers, hunters, and to control animals in factory farm situations, the majority of people haven't thought about that yet. So actually, I'm not seeing the knee-jerk reaction against technology, but potentially in different
in different domains we will be seeing that?
Yeah, I would say it's very common within scientific research for there to be what it's called a natural bias, so a bias towards things that appear to be or are perceived as, rather than necessarily that they are natural. So I'm going to get onto this in a moment, but genome editing would be a very, very good example of that, and gene editing more broadly. When we engage with publics about where the instinctive resistance is coming from, it's very often because it feels as though it's not natural. And there are explanations given for this in terms of just our own kind of evolutionary history. We have preferences for things that we think are quote unquote natural. There are also cultural impulses. But I don't think we should just entirely dismiss it as that either. I think there's a lot that we could talk about here that's actually very complex that we certainly don't have the time here to discuss or surface, but just to acknowledge that if we're living through the third industrial revolution at the moment. So this is a revolution that is primarily about the engineering of biology. It's not, in fact, AI. We think about AI. Fourth industrial revolution. AI is really part of the third industrial revolution, which is the digital information revolution, so computers and so forth. It's just the sort of zenith of that. But the first and second industrial revolutions, which was about the kind of mechanization of energy and the release of and the machine age, nobody foresaw pollution. Nobody foresaw the ozone hole. Nobody foresaw this sort. So we're mopping up in climate change the consequences of the first and second industrial revolutions. Now, many great things came from them, but you can understand why people might be resistant. We're living with disinformation now, societal disruption, all-time low belief in democracy. That's been driven by the consequences of the third industrial revolution with the digital revolution. Can we be surprised? And are publics wrong to be hesitating as we face the fourth industrial revolution? I don't think that they are.
And we should get onto that. Gene editing. Obviously, I guess it's an opportunity to maybe improve health for animals. There are some positives, but there are a lot of negatives. How do we harness that technology in a way that doesn't further commoditize animals, do you think, Melanie?
Yeah, so I'm a bit of a bore about gene editing and genome editing. So I think it is something that our society isn't taking so seriously enough. I think it is an enormous frontier for animal welfare and for what it is to be human, for what it is to have a wild world. It really matters, and we very little understand it. So when I work in bioethics in the Nuffield Council on Bioethics, we did a citizens' assembly on genome editing farmed animals. And citizens were very, very clear that they were concerned about welfare implications. So there's a great push to use gene editing and genome editing to deal with, again, a lot of the kind of negative consequences that come from farming. So trying to deal with disease in crowded organisms, making fast-growing organisms, so fast-growing salmon, for example, trying to reduce sort of injury by gene editing. There's lots of invisible forms of gene editing at large. The pandemic really accelerated this. This is one thing that I try to point out. We had the 3 Rs of animal research that have been around for a long time now, which are broadly desired by publics around the world. So this is, you aim for replacement of animal models in research, but first you work on reduction and refinement. But when gene editing got in the mix, so we gene edit widely with research models, particularly mice and rats, but other organisms as well. Once that happened, we had an uptick in animal research because replacement had been undermined by refinement. So my concern is that we are already deploying an incredibly powerful, incredibly disruptive technology. And I'm a great believer and supporter of science, but we are deploying this at present already, what in a really widespread way. It's making a lot of money as well. There has been no public consultation anywhere really substantially on this in the world, certainly no recognition of the agency and autonomy of the organisms themselves. And that's already being rolled out and normalized in our world. So the likelihood that we're heading towards greater objectification and a radical form of industrializing the bodies of organisms is already at large in society today. Sorry to be, and I haven't even got onto de-extinction technologies yet.
Well, let's talk about that, because so our poll, you can see the results of it here. If we develop the technology to breed and reintroduce extinct species, should we? Which often comes up in this area. What do you think about that, Jane?
I think there are huge risks in this, and I think it sounds good. A species went extinct potentially due to human pressures from anthropocentric or anthropogenic causes. Why not bring it back? Wouldn't that be a good
I
thing?
mean, what would be top of the list?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not actually a supporter of it. But what that does is ignore root causes. So yeah, it simply says we destroyed something and now we have the power to bring it back and say you will. Not thinking about why that happened in the first place, and also completely ignoring the interconnectedness of nature and the complexity of nature and of evolutionary processes. And so there's just something in that which is, again, just such a great example of human beings feeling like we know and understand enough to design nature and to control it. And that is fundamentally the mindset that we need to change. For me, that it doesn't feel like these are the right sorts of things for us to be emphasizing.
It's almost a microcosm of the bigger issue.
Yeah.
Can I make also put some detail on it as well? Let's just look at the reality of the situation. Many of us struggle to get money and resources into conservation and into animal welfare, and to have it be at the heart of people's priorities, despite the fact that caring for other species, particularly caring for animals, should be the pillar of what a good society is. It should be what a good society grows from, not that we do on the other side of it. Putting that to one side, hundreds of millions, something close to 500 million was raised by the group that brought back the dire wolf. Now, let me be clear that no dire wolf was brought back. There are no de-extinction technologies. It's genetically engineering a novel organism. What they did was take a grey wolf, which was had a close relationship to the dire wolf, which, by the way, was not driven to extinction by humans either. So what they've done is sold, and it's gone on, newspapers all around the world, that the dire wolf has been brought back. No, they haven't. They've genetically modified a grey wolf at the same time that there was a national public conversation on whether or not humans in North America could live alongside grey wolves, and they can't. That's the reality of the context in which this is happening.
It's basically Jurassic Park. I.e., really bad idea.
If only we could bring Jeff Goldblum along on this ride.
We'll try for next year.
Yeah. Wilberforce 26.
We'll make a phone call. Okay. I'd love to talk more about gene editing, but we haven't got long left, unfortunately. So we must move on. And this is to an area which I've spent a lot of time working in over the last stretch of time. I've been in labs in San Francisco trying, fillets of fish grown from fish cells. Quite extraordinary. That was about 10 years ago. And, it's come on a really, really long way in just 10 years. So we're talking about alternative proteins. I think at the minute it sits at it's $100 billion industry at the minute. That's the kind of figure being touted at the moment, and it grows 10% year on year. Do we think
that alternative proteins could drive a revolution which reduce our reliance on animal products? What do you think, Thomas?
I certainly think it's part of the solution, and we need to very seriously drive further research and acknowledgement of what that contribution could look like. We've got lab-grown meat in pet food in the UK today. It's not available on the market. It will be in other countries, and there are all sorts of issues around the energy use and growing this in reactors, etc., which is so foreign to the way we think about feeding ourselves. But the reality is, the biggest animal welfare crisis on the planet today is that of farmed animals and lower welfare farming. There is no way we can tackle that at scale without significantly reducing the amount of animal products we consume. Simple as. And as people want to eat protein, where are the alternatives? I think it's brilliant when, celebrity chefs talk about beans. Wonderful. But, we need to be doing more in bringing consumers to the, to the recognition that they really have a choice to make every day in their food choices. And I do think that the debate around, for example, processing in alternative products today is a detour from the actual recognition that we have got to find that solution. And for me, alternative proteins need to be part of it. And we're hopeful that we're going to see some positive language in government, strategies around supporting this and investing into this technology in the very near future.
Do you think almost culturally we've got a bit of a speed bump to get over in terms of, that's what I encounter a lot, a kind of consumer resistance to it?
Yeah, of course there will be. There's the ick factor, and there is the simple thing is if you don't want to eat animals, don't. There's plenty of alternatives in the plant-based range that you can actually do. But why not try to find solutions where we know there is a vast quantity of alternative protein that we need to provide? So I wouldn't rule it out at all. I think we should cautiously, optimistically embrace it and see where it takes us.
It's interesting, isn't it, referring to, I guess, Petri dish, as potentially having the ick factor for some people over an abattoir.
There is that. Yes, there is that. But I think it's also far too exotic and far too expensive. And,
Yeah.
we do need to keep the environmental impact and the costs basically in mind as well. The RSPCA will always speak about the animal welfare element first and foremost, but we don't live in isolation from the rest of those factors in society. And that's why I think the discussion about meat reduction, for example, squarely puts us into a debate that needs to be had with more urgency than we're having it today.
I think at the moment our audience thinks, yes, with some significant effort, it could definitely reduce our reliance on animal products. And related to this, we've got a question from Claire. Can we get a mic to Claire? This is about people having information about provenance of animal products to help them make better choices.
Thank you very much. Really fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. And
where are you from, Claire?
Oh, sorry, I'm from Humane World for Animals, so
Right.
we're a close partner organisation of the RSPCA. And the citizens' assemblies are just so encouraging because I think they confirm what we all hope and suspect, that we are a nation of animal lovers. But then the question is, and you just touched on this, Thomas, why as consumers do we make so often choices that cause animals so much suffering, and that there's so much lack of information given to people? And so, when people are interacting with animals, after they're wrapped in cling film and they're having thoughts about, some bucolic imagery of, farming from yesteryear, but actually the reality is vastly different. But my question is about the technology. Coming back to technology, we all carry around these supercomputers in our pockets and in our hands. We buy food with them. We walk around supermarkets with them. So how can we use technology that's in people's hands to connect people with real-time, accurate and useful information that can empower them to make kinder choices as consumers, and get rid of the gap between, fact and fiction in farming?
Well, I think the Citizens' Assembly discussed the issue of labeling, for example, and we would very much want to see a labeling system in place that, as a consumer, with all that confusion that is out there about what's the right thing for me and what's the impact of what I consume. It is right there in your hand. You can do the whole barcode thing today. If you think about your health on all sorts of products, there's no reason why a strong labeling, if it's sufficiently clear, sufficiently unified across product ranges, would be a great solution to that. And I think, that's where time is going to be on our side, because the development happens so quickly that I can totally see a future where, as a consumer going into a shop, into a supermarket, you will know exactly, in terms of animal welfare, the labels exist in other places, not yet in the UK. And I think that's only a matter of time now, and we should absolutely support that.
Anyone else on that?
I suppose something that's quite interesting, I've been reflecting on it a lot lately, is that when we make something that you said made me think of this, what are the environments in which we engage and consume, and how do they affect our agency? And one of the things that we have to, obviously we're animals ourselves, and when we make decisions, so when we act, the decision generally comes kind of sort of through the body, and then it comes into your kind of conscious thought. Sometimes it does come more kind of thought down into the rest of the body, into an action. But we have created these environments. You were sort of saying, why is there this disconnect? And it's because the environments that we pass through actually affect our bodies first and foremost, before they get anywhere close to our kind of cognition. So there can be a real disconnect if we're in environments that are very unempathic, or that are misleading, or that are very distracting, or where our attention is, or there's placement that we're not even aware of that's sort of leading us down a particular pathway, so that actually where our values are and where our actions are can become greatly uncoupled by the environments that we build. And I would say a lot of our commercial environments are like that. They're not helpful for us. You could say that's just as true of our health, for example, and making good, healthy choices in the environments and supermarkets as it is with our moral kind of environments or choices. So I think there's something there, and actually maybe tech can intervene there by providing a connective tissue to get value alignment and action to come together with consumers, by being that kind of missing bit that overrides what's happening in that commercial, environment that you're passing through. There's possibly something there.
Brilliant. Thank you. Now, we are almost out of time. We just have time for one last question. Now, I've got it here, and a lot of you will have looked at this, but the Animal Futures report is very much focused on what 2050 is going to look like. And so I'd just love to quickly whiz down the panel and find out from each of you what you think the best case scenario or worst case scenario is going to look like in 2050. Start with you, Thomas.
So the worst case scenario for me is that we're going to see more horrible monster breeds on the farm and in our homes, distorted, and there's been no regulation and no changes in values and attitudes that would prevent that. On the positive side, I'll go back to something we said earlier. If we understand how animals feel and think, in my view, that will drive up campaigns for better welfare, and we're going to get to a much better place. But with all this talk about artificial intelligence, let's not forget the one thing we already have today, which is emotional intelligence, and that can ignite that kindness that we're going to need to see for every animal.
Excellent point. Yes. Melanie?
Yeah, my worst case scenario is probably that we will have killed the wild. So I have genuine concerns that we could get to 2050 and there will be no wild left. We only have 4% of wild mammal biomass left. So I think it's a realistic proposition, if we're not careful, that we'll kill the wild. So that distresses me. And with that will have come the widespread objectification of other species. But my really hopeful scenario, and I have to be honest, I'm more on the hopeful side, would be that we have a new form of civilization. We have one that is democratically inclusive. We have one in which we are more connected with the living world again. And we have one in which we haven't demoted humans, but we've lifted up the rest of the living world with us.
Brilliant.
Very hard to follow.
Jane.
Yes. Pressure is on. I should have started thinking. I was like, the worst case scenario for me, it's Orbis. And it is that we've actually we've trivialized the power that technology is giving us. So for me, that is actually that every one of us has an app on our phone. We can communicate with our dogs and our cats at home. We can have a quick little conversation with the birds in our garden. But it has fundamentally changed nothing about the way we are engaged with them. In fact, has entrenched the systems of control. And that is leading to, it degrades the health of all life, including our own lives. But very much like Melanie, I think that there is huge potential for us to emerge into a place where there's this new relationship with nature that could look like many, many, many different things. This new civilization that you're talking about, it could like financial mechanisms that give agency to other species for actual financial agency. It could look like all corporations having to have an AI mediate with the rest of nature on their boards of directors. But it could also look like, instead of just human citizens' assemblies when we're debating these questions, it could look like multi-species assemblies. So all of that is actually possible.
That is a great note to finish on. Multi-species assemblies.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of the Animal Futures podcast. Thank you to our panel, Melanie, Jane and Thomas, whose shared knowledge and expertise have helped to enlighten and explore how we embrace technology in a way that drives a better future for animals, people and the planet. I hope listening to this podcast has inspired you to consider what you can do to help create a better world for every animal. You can find out more information about the Animal Futures project on the RSPCA website. Thanks for listening.